pleasure to have Laurie Beck, who is the VP of Consumer Insight at Coty, joining us this morning as our guest disruptor. She has been involved with companies like RB, Unilever, Kantar, and Nielsen in the past, and is a consumer champion for all these different businesses. She's passionate about unlocking and actioning consumer and market insight to drive the right business growth. So Laurie, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about the opportunity mindset as businesses at this time are trying to pivot and seek out new opportunities in a vastly different world. While Laurie and I are discussing this, I encourage anyone listening to put questions into the Q&A box and we'll come to those later. So just to begin the conversation, consumer behavior is changing massively at the moment. We're seeing this particularly online with e-commerce spiking and different products showing kind of where we are at in lockdown. So we had toilet roll being really popular, or really sought after rather, a few weeks ago, and now we have hair clippers. Everyone's wanting to have it to cut their hair at home. So Laurie, how are you seeing the struggles that consumers are facing at the moment manifest in their behavior, but particularly in their online behavior?
In the US, the US is obviously very advanced from online perspective, but we're seeing 10% of consumers in the US have live streamed for the first time. 14% have made their first online grocery delivery. All of those things are really important because if the experience is positive, then that drives the switching behavior, that people will start embracing new things. The critical here is switching rather than stopping. If you stop your behavior, you're likely to pick it up again. If you switch your behavior and you have a positive experience, then you're likely to stick with that going forward.
So I guess as all of this is changing, how are businesses meant to be responding and keeping up with this change and enabling the, like you've just said, the switch rather than the stop behavior?
So I think there is, for me, the critical is human empathy. So really having a deep consumer, customer understanding, but also that empathy with what people are going through, so that you're coming out with something that is, one, is on brand, and two, that is authentic. So there are a couple of different ways that I would look at it. I think there's some organizations and some companies that are very well positioned to be delivering information. So a small example, I've actually been quite impressed by the supermarkets, their response, their emails, their ongoing emails to tell you what is happening with shopping and when can you shop and what's actually, what's the right protocol. Also companies, you mentioned RB, they've got brands like Lysol, Enfamil, which is the baby nutrition, baby formula. They've actually put together a website, one, supporting the messages, but two, critically also removing all the misinformation that's out there. So doing a lot of mythbusters, that is really important. But equally, I think there is also a lot of opportunity for inspiration. People are looking for some excitement, some diversion. So being able to actually also entertain consumers, that can also come across really well as long as it's consumer need first, brand second, and brand is the facilitator. So actually giving them different experiences will actually benefit the brand in the longer term as things change. The last point that I'd make on this is that I think it's really important to monitor behaviors. So to the point of switching, stopping. Humans have got really short memory. So we're in this moment right now and everything obviously is heightened and something will change. But it's really important to monitor that behavior so that we can see what actually is sticking versus where is the reversal, because you've got to be very agile in your plans as to how you actually then go to market and how you engage consumers. That's the last thing that I'd say, that we just really need to keep monitoring what is happening rather than assume that this is going to be the catalyst and everything changes.
Mm-hmm. And while, as you said, human empathy is a big thing that businesses need to be weaving through their interaction with their customers at the moment. One thing that I've seen that I've really enjoyed is the innocent drinks posting on, they kind of do a daily post of random facts that no one needs to know, but it's kind of fun to contrast to all of this media push that we're constantly reading the news, and none of it's very good news. So that's something that I've noticed that I think is a nice way of interacting with customers, maintaining the brand, and I guess also monitoring the behavior. But if we think about monitoring customer behavior, it's, I think, being sensitive, like you said, is really important at this time. How can businesses be doing that while still maintaining the insights that they need and adding to those when behavior is changing so rapidly?
Yeah, I think, so to your point of innocence, I think there's a stat that came out from Ipsos to say that 70% of consumers actually want like normal advertising. Everyone wants some degree of normality in what is chaos, not chaos, rather chaos. So I think there is, going back to how can you provide additional services, how can you provide inspiration and excitement for consumers? You can still learn at the same time. So we all know that data is the new currency, that people at the moment are also more than, I've never seen surveys completed as quickly as over this time, because people are sitting there waiting and really have got nothing else to do. That's not to say that means that you go out there and you grab all of the information. It is about also what you're giving in routine. So how can you get insight into people's lives through services? So whether that is something that you're providing, if your company or brand is all about cooking, how can you give some inspiration but also learn what people are doing? So that also feeds your insight, but it also feeds your pipeline of innovation as to how you actually show up going forward. So I think those are, you know, to me, it's about the facilitation through a company, making sure that it's on brand, bring those experiences through, and those that information, that the challenge, there's all sorts of things that you could look at. You can gain so much at the same time, but it's being sensitive what you give for what you get.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things that we talked about last week, actually, when we were looking at innovation and the changing speeds of innovation having to happen really quickly to have immediate effect. I would love to hear your thoughts on how what insight professionals should be doing now in order to respond quickly. Obviously, that it takes time to collect the data and all of that. But what would your advice be to insight professionals who are trying to strategically impact their businesses at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think insight is actually the remit and responsibility of everyone in the business. So I'm not pushing my responsibility. It isn't my title after all. But that said, if you have got insight teams, they are going to be very well tapped into partner agencies and organizations. There's a plethora of information out there at the moment, facts, figures, but also the softer side, the ethnography as to what is happening with consumers. They're largely going to be tapped in. So just by way of example, I've set up a cross-divisional within the Coty world, a cross-divisional insight task force. And the purpose of that task force is gather all of this information that is out there, but critically to get to the key sound bites that we then share out back to the business every 10 days or so. Because everyone's overwhelmed with information. However, it doesn't just end there to say, you know, these are the facts and figures, and people are shopping more in convenience channels, etc. What are the implications? So there's one that there is a very tactical implication of how do you engage with people. So a very my world is the world of cosmetics. So if people are wearing masks, they are not wearing the same degree of cosmetics, but their eyes are really important. So actually all of the work and tutorials is, you know, how do you create the best eye look, for example, which I know sounds really superficial given everything else that's happening, but it again is some light relief. But I think there's also the longer term impact of how do we get ready for this ramp up? What are the important things? So how do we engage people back into stores to give them security and safety, that they can shop there? What are the key lines that we need to protect and we need to really prioritize, so that because consumers are looking for that trust going forward. So I think from an insight perspective, there is a lot that can be done, not necessarily because I think there's more about the core brands rather than innovation that should be reprioritized, but it's where should we be leaning forward and what are some of the learnings, even if it's looking to China or to Italy, who are further on in terms of development, what actually is happening and what are the implications for us then?
I'm thinking about the ramp up that's going to happen. I think at the moment, one of the big business concerns is the problem of the logistics and the supply chain and what's happening there. How can businesses be kind of getting around that problem, maybe developing new products that don't need that same supply chain? What would your thoughts be on that? And then I guess after everything is going back to normal, whatever that looks like, how is that movement going to happen as well?
Yeah, let me take the first part of it because I think that's slightly easier. Which is to say, yeah, logistics is an enormous challenge for any organization right now. Factories are closed. I think 80% of our factories are closed at the moment, and as it should be, because we've got to put employees first. But as we start planning for that ramp up, there is a real need from a planning perspective. How do we prioritize? What are the priorities that will make the biggest impact, that also will help consumers? As I said, I think the core lines, the existing lines, are where consumers will have a trust issue generally. So if there are product lines or service lines that that have stood the test of time, those are the ones to prioritize. In the interim also, it is also being incredibly transparent. So with consumers, as we start to ramp up from outside, if products are not available, it's being transparent about it. But being clear, if you wanted that but it's not available, here's an alternative. Or if you have sent out products, but there are delays because we can't get it out, is also that constant communication, because it's about managing expectations. The brands that really stand up, I'm talking brands because that's my world, but the companies that really stand up in terms of their transparency, their honesty, are the ones that are more likely to actually come through this, rather than trying to pretend all is good when clearly we're all in uncharted territory at this point.
I guess it's about getting that balance, like you said earlier, about how consumers want to see the normal advertising, but also advertising that is sensitive. So that's a fine line. How should businesses be looking at that? How do they know when they've gone too far one way or too far the other?
I think how they know will be the area of consumer response to it, like never before. However, you want to avoid that. So I think for me, it's really that depth of understanding as to where consumers are at, what their needs are, having empathy of where you're coming from. I guess the ways that I would look at it is break down the business a little bit. So one is from a business, what resources does the business have available that can be used? So whether that's the likes of production lines, a lot of the fragrance lines, including Coty, and actually also including the likes of BrewDog, are now making sanitizer. So repurposing those lines for something that is absolutely needed. There is also from an employee perspective, where the skill set that employees have. So that could be around the likes of Barbour, the likes of Louis Vuitton, the likes of Gucci, that actually are making scrubs now and repurposing both production lines, but also the skills that is behind. Obviously keeping their employees safe at the same time, but really using their resources. It's also thinking slightly outside of the box. So what other natural resources might you have? And I say natural resources, it's just because it lends me to an example that I read, that there's a lot of fresh food that is out there at the moment, and people are looking for frozen for obvious reasons. Repurposing that. So in Asia, there was an oversupply, or rather too much supply versus demand of dragon fruit. And somebody actually used that within their baking, which came up with a completely new product. It suddenly became a trend to have pink bread. And it really was about, who knows, it might even continue going forward. It's how can we make use of the resources that we've got? For me, the critical is that it needs to come from, what can I do to help? And wherever possible, that needs to be help first, profit very much a secondary thought. Now I'm saying wherever possible because everyone's business is in a different circumstance. But this is about leaning in versus thinking about purely just your P&L sheet.
Before we move on, I'd just like to remind anyone who has any questions just to stick them in the Q&A box. We've had a couple come in already, which is great. So please do keep adding those questions as we come to that time in a few minutes. Before we move on, Laurie, just one final area I'd like to touch on. This episode is called The Opportunity Mindset, and you've spoken about it already, about putting the consumer first and the profit second where possible. I think an anxiety that many businesses have at the moment is where they're repurposing, where they're changing up their products. It might be seen as opportunistic and taking advantage of quite a bad situation. What would you say to those businesses? Where is the line between seeing the opportunities to serve your consumers in a new way and being opportunistic?
I think the opportunistic goes back to profit. So if you're trying to profit zero out of it, then that is the challenge. But I think for me the really sweet spot where you are more likely to get it right than you are to get it wrong is taking what your business stands for, what your brand stands for, what its core purpose is, why it exists still, where consumers' needs are and what your resources are. And finding that sweet spot between those three is more likely to give you something that is more true to what you can deliver, it's more authentic, but it also is still helping. I think there is so much that is here and now where there is help needed, whether it's communities, employees first, I think, communities, and obviously then the wider good, and they will be going forward. So it's really continuing to think a little bit out of the box, and trying to find where are those opportunities, because consumers will remember. They will remember where brands have got it right. Unfortunately, they also remember where brands and companies have unfortunately got it wrong. And they will call that out. We are all online now, so there's really no hiding away from it. If you do get it wrong, because as people are trying to help and sometimes they will get it wrong, it's acknowledging that also and being very clear as to, we got that wrong and we've reshifted, and therefore we're thank you for keeping us true. I think again it's just having a very adult relationship and an adult conversation with the public and with consumers.
Totally. Well, thank you for that, Laurie. We've chatted a lot about different changing consumer behaviours and how businesses can respond, and your answers have been really valuable, so thank you for sharing that with us. So we've got a few questions for you now. As we're going through these, please feel free, anyone who's listening, to just keep adding questions into the Q&A box. I will be going through those, posing those questions to Laurie, so please do feel free to stick anything in there and add your name if you would like to be acknowledged for your question. So just the first question, one thing that we have, I think, have seen quite a lot on Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club is this question coming up of how should workers, or how should business leaders rather, be motivating and encouraging their workers while everyone's scattered at home. Have you had, do you have any tips on that, or stories that you've seen that have worked really well?
I think that is key, because while we can all do video calls, it's the face-to-face obviously and is missing, and we are human after all, so we are very social animals. And I would perhaps look at it in perhaps three ways. The first one is quite an obvious one, but is around communication. We cannot communicate enough at these times. Preferably video conversation also, so that we can see people, we can see how they're getting on from our teams, and the wider group, but making sure also that there are constant updates as to what's happening with business, what's happening with priorities. Everyone wants to, of course, be working on what is important, and we mustn't assume, because there are none of those corridor conversations, that people will know what has changed and what is important. So to me, the communication is absolutely critical. Also, I keep on mentioning the word empathy, but I think understanding where our teams are at. So yes, where we can, we're working at home. We've also got people who are trying to put on their job, homeschool their children, and concerned equally about their personal situation. So being really understanding with this flexibility that is required, so that we can actually also help them, so that they feel like they're actually still doing their job, but they're also looking after their family, because that is, they can't just work extra hours just to make up everything. So being very clear, again, that goes back to priorities. And making sure we trust our teams, because there is a tendency potentially for some teams some leaders to then start micromanaging, because they don't feel that they're getting that feedback. So empower your teams and trust your teams. And I think one other aspect, wherever possible and wherever, of course, it's appropriate, is to bring in a bit of fun. There's one of the teams that I work with. They've got a weekly meeting, and they start every weekly meeting with something really silly, like, you need to come up with the craziest headdress, or glasses or something. I mean, it's completely clearly not linked to business. However, it just lightens the mood. It gets everyone focused on something else. It also just humanizes the situation a little bit and brings in a little bit of light-hearted fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And one thing I've seen a lot actually is we've been doing it ourselves as Nimbus 90, is a pub quiz as a social, just to have some time at the end of the week to catch up and cool off, and that's been a really nice thing for us. I think I've seen other people do that as well, so that's just an example.
I fully agree. I think having virtual drinks, virtual dinner, I'm not quite sure why it's taken this for us to think that we should be doing that. It's crazy. We've had this technology, but I agree. I think it's super important.
Yeah, totally. So we've got, I think, still staying on our how we should be looking at employees at the moment. We have a question here that's asking, with companies furloughing staff, what do you think the impact of this will be for consumer brands?
Yeah, I mean, this is a real concern. I think there is the impact for consumer brands overall is, to be honest, it's going to be the impact regardless whether it's consumer brands or whether it's services. So I think there is the immediate impact on one, how companies are helping and working with their staff, and that is how consumers perceive it. So there is very much how your brand is showing up, really. So I think that is the first one, being as responsible, obviously, as we can be throughout. There is also the impact of all of those people from a financial perspective. As I said, this is looking at a recession like I think we've never experienced. So the impact on how how we can, as I said, where are the valued items? Where are the trusted items? Those are the ones that we need to be pushing, and not pushing as in a price push. Sorry, that made me sound really callous. But we need to be prioritizing in terms of how we support people on that, and I think also how brands respond. to that, and how they actually respond to helping out. Whether this is the big corporations, they're already donating a lot of funds. It's also a lot of them are donating where it's on brand food, care packages, etc. So that there is one, they're giving people the products that they trust, but they also just helping people over this time. Again, it's really, there's a balance between how much can we help, which is, I think at this point it's critical, but it's also managing that from financial, because you've also got to keep the staff that you've got, and make sure that you protect as many and as long as you possibly can.
Thank you for that. So we have another question. So this is from Carla Stent. Thank you, Carla. She says, in an economic recession, training and marketing are often the first to be sacrificed, but e-commerce has become more critical at this time. Do you think the consumer voice will become more important in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I do think, so thank you for that question. I do think the consumer voice has increasingly become important. The rise of consumer demand and the rise of what some companies are calling the vigilant consumer, calling out companies that are not doing what they should be doing. I think it will, and I think e-commerce actually gives us enormous insight into people's lives. So what they're buying, ratings and reviews. So there are a number of companies that look at ratings and reviews. That in itself gives us a lot of insight into what are people's needs, how satisfied are they, where are their gaps, where are their opportunities. I think the e-com world and being able to take all of that, the data that comes out the back of it, and really make sense of it is super important. I think the point around marketing and particularly training being cut, yes, I think the marketing activities, media in a lot of companies, for example, has been cut for the next couple of months because of finances. And there is a balance there, because one, it's around how do you protect your critical, so that we make sure that the production continues. But there is also, how do we protect our staff? It's for how long it continues. To me, there's a balance for how long it continues. You can't just park your staff and not train them. You equally have to show up to consumers from a marketing perspective, but you can do that in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be the big campaigns that you spend millions on. It can actually be something that is more grassroots, that actually really gets probably better traction actually if it takes off from an organic perspective rather than a push perspective from companies.
Thank you for that. We have another question here from Ella. Thank you, Ella. She asks, how do you see customer loyalty changing post-COVID-19? What we're seeing at the moment, I think that is very interesting. The concept of loyalty, if any of you are bar and shop properties, there is very little loyalty in the market as it stands. We all switch behavior a lot. However, what I will say around the customer loyalty is, we've seen already in times of uncertainty, in times even of recession, the big brands are the ones where people revert back to because of the trust. And if you take brands, the brand I used to work on, Dettol in the UK, is it seems to be rather a dusty brand. That is one of the brands that people are reverting back to. Clearly, there's also the antibacterial side, which is hugely important right now. But there is a lot of trust in some of these heritage brands. Unilever has also come out and said that some of their sort of heritage brands, which have been struggling more so than some of the kind of new kids on the block, that is where people are moving back to. So again, it's making sure that when they are moving back to those brands, that they actually have the experience that they should. So it's really understanding where those people will spend money and put in that extra 10% where it really matters.
and where it's delivered. If not, then they will revert back to either the private label, which in itself is very trusted brands. The Tesco brands are incredibly trusted, Sainsbury's, etc. But I think some of the newer sort of indie brands coming through haven't established that trust perhaps as much. So there is potentially, I'm saying potentially, a little bit more risk with that.
Continuing on, looking at brands and how brands are being perceived at the moment. So this is a question about social media. With many consumer brands heavily focusing on social media, has this medium become more or less valuable in the current environment?
More or less valuable. I think it's also about, one is the reach of it. So the traditional media still has the best reach. But from a authentic, if it really is authentic, because there's a lot of misinformation on social media also. Depending where the source is coming from, I think the value still continues. So we're seeing people actually reverting back to almost the figures of authority for information. And I'm not saying necessarily that we're all gathering at 5 o'clock for the latest updates from the government, but there are making use of, if you have key opinion leaders, if you have got some really influential people that you work with, there is a lot of trust with that. I don't think that the media necessarily, we haven't seen anything that there has been a backlash against any of the social media. There is a need to strip out the misinformation versus the real information, which is why I think people are gravitating a lot more back to, as I said, back to the trusted sources and trusted information. Particularly when it comes down to what's happening the latest in health, etc.
So now thinking about, we've just had a question come up about market data, which I think would be good to have a look at. This person has asked, in countries like Ireland where market data can be very sketchy, in these situations where data from traditional agencies like Kantar/Nielsen is less relevant for your industry, how would you suggest companies looking for data for insight, and how would they gather that?
That's quite a broad question.
Yes.
So yes, where you don't have the traditional data in terms of sales, etc. I think there are other ways to capture it. You've got to be sensitive about what you're capturing at this point. So dependent what that industry is. If the industry is not impacted, is not coming from a health perspective, is not coming from a antibacterial, etc., where behavior is so different at this point, you can still capture that data. Getting data from consumers now, whether that's through surveys, and yes, that's claim data, or whether that is through more ethnography, through various agencies that are actually capturing ongoing as to what people are doing, the usage of data, how people perceive things. There is very clear evidence that the testing pre-COVID-19 and testing during COVID-19, provided it's not skewed by, as I said, by the categories, it is exactly the same. So being able to get that data, there is a lot of ability. One, it might be dependent on that where that business is. It does lead to a cost, and I appreciate that at the moment everyone is stretched for budget, but there are nimble ways of getting that information and keeping a finger on the pulse as to what is happening. It's even as simple as we are all consumers within your organization. So on a very cost basis of, provided people are not actually working on the individual projects and work streams, you can gather information. People are so willing at this point to actually share what's happening in their lives.
And I guess the next question to that, which we've just had come in as well, what do you see as the essential skills for insight teams to navigate the current need for rapid change?
I think that is not just a coronavirus related question. I think the industry has changed a lot. Where it was before was very much, it was even called market research. It was like sit with your clipboard, come out with the stats and then go and present it. It needs to be able to disseminate a huge amount of data, whether that's numbers, whether that's insights, whether that's video footage that's coming through, to be able to actually connect all the dots. And most importantly, is not the what's happening, it's the so what we do about it. Should be trust within an organization that your insight team know what they're doing technically. It is about how they actually influence and making sure that they've got the right forums and the right support so that they can actually add that all the way through. So there are clearly there are some parts of the insight world that are more traditional, and there are others that are leaning into a lot of the new startups. That's also balancing the risk. So where is the biggest risk, where is your biggest capex that you might actually still need to do things in a slightly more traditional way, versus where do you lean forward and actually start doing things on a minimal viable proposition, get it out to consumers to get that feedback. So I think one, it is from skills, the agility within business, and it's not just inside, it's marketing, super important, and you need to be able to have the right skills and the right people to connect those dots. And two, it's also having the trust in those people that they know where the risk is and therefore why to do things slightly differently versus where to lean forward and take arguably more risks, but for potentially a higher reward.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for. There are lots more questions. So sorry if your question didn't get answered, but I encourage you to continue the conversation on LinkedIn using the hashtag Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club. Laurie, it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and your advice and tips at this time. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for making time this morning. Really appreciate it.
So I'll hand back to Emma now. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you both very much indeed. As Shama said, that was really, really valuable. And I think there are so many facets to what Laurie and so many of her peers are going through at the moment, and indeed us as consumers. So thank you all very much. As you all know, this Breakfast Club series, Pivot Don't Panic, very much focuses on our event that we do twice a year, Chief Disruptor Live, which is virtual this year on Tuesday, the 2nd of June. Please do register and join us for that if you'd like to. It's very much about how to empower you and your organization, how to pivot quickly and efficiently, and very much designed for disruptors, for change makers, for innovators, for those that really want to make change within their organization. And at this very critical time, it is even more important than ever. So there are masterclasses both across the morning and the afternoon, as well as keynotes and so on. And we'll be able to share more of that with you offline apart from this.